The meeting will come to order. We are now holding a Indian River County Commission's workshop on fire station locations, meeting held Thursday, June 25th, 2015.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman?
Did I mess up already?
Yeah. This is a workshop?
Yes.
And you're in a jacket and tie? I mean, that is pretty much out of order.
I'm inclined to agree with you. Had I not been on TV 10 this morning, or the Buzz TV now.
Oh, no. Any other day, you would have had that tie off within 15 seconds.
I'm with you, but my wife...
Confused here.
My wife gets upset whenever I dirty more one pair of clothes a day.
Right? Okay, I just want to be sure on this. I'm
all right.
confused.
The Thursday, June 25th, before I was so rudely interrupted, 2015 at 2 p.m. Oh. At this time, I'd like to call on Commissioner Peter D. O'Brien to give the Pledge of Allegiance.
Everyone, please rise and face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Commissioner O'Brien.
You're quite welcome, Mr. Chairman.
Nice job getting up, spring in your step there.
Yes.
And,
oh, boy.
Next, we'll move on to the fire station relocation. And we'll start off, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. King, John King. Welcome, John.
Good morning, Commissioners. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Excuse me. For the record, my name is John King, Emergency Services Director. I met with Commissioner Zork yesterday. He's prepared a slide presentation. He's asked me to present the first 12 slides, and he'll present the rest. But the request was I give a brief history, as brief as I can, on the first 12 stations that the department has and kind of how we got there. And I think he has a discussion about Insurance Services Office and some other things, but there's a lot that goes into the building of stations. And talk about fire rescue in general. Unlike recreation and education, which create social goods to a community, a fire rescue department responds to human and physical failures. Failure to yield at a traffic accident, the traffic signal. Failure to yield at a failure to seek preventative medical care until one has an emergency. Failure to maintain proper use of one's property. Failure to prepare for a natural disaster. I don't think anybody intentionally plans for those things to happen, but there is an expectation by the community that government has an agency to respond to those needs to protect their person, their property, the environment, and to sustain our economy. All those things are wrapped around developing a fire rescue agency. More importantly, as you're discussing about future station locations, this elected body is making decisions that will impact this community for the next 4 decades. When you build a fire rescue facility, more often, it's very rare you ever move that location. Now, it's hard to foresee what's going to happen 40 years in the future, but if I can give you some examples of how we got there and some of the things that we're going to be considering today. Fire Station 1. ISO, Insurance Services Office, the Commission is well aware of what they are, and I'll let you discuss that later. But for the most part, you get certain insurance breaks on property under the old standard if you're within, they prefer you to be within 1.5 miles of a station, but they'll give you credit up to 5 miles of a station and within 1,000 feet of a fire hydrant. Station 1, where it's located now on Old Dixie, is actually the 3rd location for Station 1. Station 1, the number 2 Station 1 was in the south parking lot of the post office downtown Vero Beach next to the railroad tracks on 20th Street. It was there for about 40 years. The post office needed to expand, and when they did, he said, we have other property at the south end of the city on Old Dixie, be a perfect location for a new Station 1, and that's how it got there in 1982. Station 2, which is essentially at the east end of the Barber Bridge, what's now the Barber Bridge, actually they opened that station in 1959. Where did they build that station and why? They had a need on the barrier island, and 2, the city had property in a park at the east end of the bridge. Station 3. Station 3 is at the west end of the city limits, the west end of the Vero Beach Airport. It's on 43rd Avenue. And was there a need, and why is it located there? The need was the city of Vero Beach at the time was providing services into the unincorporated area, contract services, and there was a need to better service the Gifford and western Vero Beach area, and the FAA provided the lion's share of the money to build a station that served a dual purpose. It both covered the airport and it also covered residential fire and medical needs on the west end. So that station opened in 1976. So subsequently, there was some decision to create some fire rescue districts, and that vote was taken in 1980, went into effect in 1981. And what happened was they created 3 districts. There was a South District, which was predominantly east of 95, south of 77th Street, and included all of the barrier island with the exception of Indian River Shores, which had their own fire and police and rescue business. North of 77th and those areas around Fellsmere was the only area west of 95. Those were in the North District. And then the rest of the county, which was essentially south of Fellsmere and all the way out to near Uala Junction, that was a West District. So they created 3 districts. The impact of creating those districts was it was going to change the ISO rating for the South District. They had a 3 mil cap. The West had a 3 mil cap. The North County Fire District had a half mil cap initially. They came back a year later and changed it to 1 mil because they couldn't do much with a half mil. But because you increase the size of the district, you increase the population being served. I worked on this study back in the late 70s and early 80s on that project, and let's talk about where Station 4 is now. Station 4, and actually Joe Baird was part of this process too, because the ISO study said the district needed a station near 4th Street and 43rd Avenue and one in the Vero Beach Highlands. And initially it was said, that's going to cost too much money. We're going to take, and
Joe said that?
I know you're shocked too. I'm still not over it, sir. It happened in 1982. The district decided, the South County District decided to put a Butler building, a metal building, on some property that the county owned. That's before they finished the water treatment plant off Oslo Road. The property that fronted Oslo Road was given to the district, or a small purchase to the district. And they built a station there with the anticipation it's going to be here 5 years. And in this is 1982, and in 5 years we're going to tear that building down and we'll have a station at 4th Street and 43rd Avenue and one at the entry to the Vero Beach Highlands. That station is still there. Station 5 was also built in the same year, and the idea was trying to provide rescue services and fire services.
John, just real quick, Station 4 is still there, but Station 4 is not there as the Butler building.
Yes.
It's not a Butler building. Good question. In 2005, it was rebuilt. In fact, almost the entire construction cost was from a federal grant. And I would tell you that Jason Brown and his staff were a great help, and Joe, in helping us to get those federal funds in to replace that building that was damaged so badly
During the hurricane.
during the hurricanes.
Okay.
Station 5, at the same time, how Station 5 came into existence was the ISO study also suggested that Gifford and the North Barrier Island both needed stations, because the North Barrier Island was in the South District, if that makes any sense. There was not money at the time to build that station, build those 2 stations, so they agreed to build a Butler building also where Station 5 is now, and for a 5-year window. And again, we still have a Station 5. It was rebuilt in 2006 as a result of the hurricanes. So that's 1 through 5. Station 6 is on the South Barrier Island, and there was need for services down there because, as you remember, the moorings and some other areas began to develop down there. They needed fire rescue protection as well. And that station, when it was built, if you look to the immediate, well, behind in the back door of that station is where they have ground storage for water. And so that was another government property that was used to build a station. Station 7, now 6 and 7 were both opened in 1984. Station 7, the property out there, was secured through a DRI from Village Green. And if you recall from a previous discussion we had, when that station was built, there was nothing west of 58th Avenue, with the exception of the truck stop, Mrs. B's, and the beginning of Village Green. There was no mall. There was no Ryanwood Shopping Center, no Office Depot, none of that existed.
Plantation?
No.
No, that came later. And so the elected body at that time knew that area was going to grow. They didn't know how fast, but they knew they needed services out there because it was a very long time before services were received in that portion of the county, and the county has grown since then. After that, There were volunteer stations in the North County, and the more predominant stations during this period was Roseland, Sebastian, and Fellsmere. There was a small contingent of folks that were in Vero Lake Estates and also in Walbasso. The district was voted on in 1991. 1992, October, it went into effect. And the Station 8 and the former Station 9, which used to be on US 1 almost across from Wendy's in the city of Sebastian, those stations were purchased from the volunteers, and they used district funds to expand those to include sleeping areas, because predominantly they were stations that had brush trucks in them, and they brought in traditional fire engines and put sleeping quarters and cooking quarters in those two stations. That was about 88, 89 is when that happened. And then Station 10 in Fellsmere was purchased from the volunteers in about 1995. And with that, added a full complement of crews out there at that location. In fact, there was some discussion, and Joe and Barrett and I worked on that project as well. The initial thought was to move that station closer to 95 and County Road 512. The city of Fellsmere requested that station be in the city of Fellsmere, which it probably is, would now be in the city limits. But it was requested to put it back in the heart
Little did you know there was two ways to accomplish that.
And then around 2000, a good friend of this community, B.T. Cooksey, represented a group of folks. He was also a volunteer fireman for many, many, many years. And he said there was a group on the Barrier Island, North Barrier Island, that also needed fire rescue services in that area because the community was growing and they needed those services for insurance and for protection. And so he helped us. He actually helped secure that property where the station is on Walbasso Beach, Station 11. And then in 2009, Joe Baird and myself and Brian Burkeen went to the city of Sebastian and said that subsequent to the hurricanes, Station 9, the old Station 9 on US 1, was damaged so badly we could not rebuild it there. The property was an insufficient size. Ingress and egress on the US 1 was not safe for either the emergency workers or just the traffic on that road. And Joe was a significant help in securing some property in Roseland. Now, Joe and myself and Brian went to the city council, Sebastian City Council, on 2 occasions, and we asked them to allow us to secure some property near City Hall. We thought for coverage of the community, that might be a great place, and it met some of the ISO studies that we had done. But ultimately, the station ended up outside the city limits, and it's actually near the Sebastian River Medical Center. There's a commercial node there. It's near the airport. It's near the hospital, and so it's serving us as a good function there. Also in 2009, we secured the property for Station 12, which is on 49th Street, and that was received from Waterway Village through a DRI, that property was, and it was to help them. And we were also eligible to get a CDBG grant to purchase about 75% of that station because of the economic impacts from the hurricanes in those areas. And so that is the first 12 slides that I bring to your attention today. And we'll talk about ISO in the future. I'm going to bring Commissioner Zork his
the magic wand
slide changer, and I'm also going to bring to you the agenda item that I wrote for February the 17th, where we talked about what's going to happen over the next couple of years. I believe at some point in this discussion, this may become a topic of discussion.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Oh, thanks.
Thank you. It's getting there. It's getting there.
Click faster. Don't make me commandeer that thing.
All right, thanks, John, for starting off the presentation today, and also want to give a big thanks to the mapping mapping folks, Robert Garzi, Will Rice, and the 9/11 staff out at the Sheriff's Office provide us with an abundant amount of data to produce a lot of the information that you're going to see coming forward. this meeting really is kind of part two in what I started on in 2014, where I hosted the State Fire Marshal and representatives from ISO, Brad Bain, who's now Senior Vice President with ISO, came here with the State Fire Marshal and presented to Indian River Shores, St. Lucie County. I think we had some from Brevard as well as Indian River, of how do we measure, how do we follow ISO, how do we use it as a guidepost of where to go. However, since that presentation in 2014, what's called the NFPA 1710 study has come out, and you're going to see how it dramatically changes, how they're going to look at us, how they're going to audit us. Kind of in preparation for this meeting had, because of the negotiations and other big issues going on, this really I wanted to do about 4 months ago, but just trying to get a slot that worked that didn't compete with other matters of the county, this is the date we came up with. So in the last number of months, I've visited in real time or online a number of stations from around the state, learned the latest in station design and construction, also spoke with fire station consultants of what they have learned, how to better provide both response areas and the stay environment to our staff while they're working in the stations. And I start off a lot of my discussions with the ISO staff and the Fire Marshal's office because the effects of 1710, we've just went through the audit process with the state on FMP where they came in and looked after the fact on things. Under 1710, when they're going to come in here and start looking at us, they're going to take actual fire calls. They're going to look at the time the call took to process, the time to be dispatched, the time out the door, the actual real time it took to drive to the scene, not the projected old kind of 5-mile rule. So in going forward, here is a summary of the ISO presentation from February 2014. And actually it was Julius Halas, the division director of the State Fire Marshal's office, was here and jointly put on the presentation with myself and Brad Bain. So kind of going through this gives the jurisdiction and authority. We don't need, I want to just kind of focus on the 1710 rule that is really the game changer and how ISO, and I don't know who's driving 1710.
Probably the Florida building.
Well, actually, this is a national, so it would be the entire country is driving it, because one thing it's going to do when it drives it is going to drive up the cost to every district, every fire department in the country. And why is this important to us? If you took a 20-year life cycle of a station, which we traditionally use them for longer than that, every station we put in and we man, it's $45 to $50 million using today's dollars for a 20-year service period for a station. And that doesn't count rotating new equipment and other things. So these are big ticket items. So looking at where we put them so we don't put in too many too close, we really need to take the rules and kind of maximize them. Let me scroll down here to the second paragraph on here.
Yes, sir. Ask questions as you go through?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So if they're going to take the response times and start baking that into our ISO rating and telling us where we need and what we need, how would that start to affect our relationship that we have right now where the PSAP centers up in Sebastian, that they get the calls first? And how much does that mean as far as cost to us?
Well, we have one primary PSAP, Public Safety Answering Point. It's the Sheriff's Office.
Right.
The Sheriff's Department Dispatch Center dispatches Sheriff's Department, City of Fellsmere, Indian River Shores, and Orchid, and all fire rescue. The PSAP in Vero Beach and the one in Sebastian, they only dispatch their law enforcement and the call transfer to...
I get that, but it goes to them first.
Right.
It goes to them first.
And that costs us time.
That costs us time, and that's what I'm
Yes.
getting at.
Right.
Yes.
And so I guess I'm wondering how whether there would be millions of dollars of savings of reversing that. Or just not doing away with it. Just basically it comes to us, then it goes to their PSAP.
That's easy to do.
Okay. And will it be easy to quantify in the event that, that the study comes back and tells
As far
us?
as infrastructure goes, it's easy to make that happen.
Okay.
Because as far as effectuating that, architecturally it wouldn't take that long. But I would have to have some discussions with the cities to do that. But clearly, I also serve as your 911 coordinator.
Yeah.
Under Florida law, the Board of County Commissioners are the responsible agency for 911. The City of Vero Beach and the City of Sebastian and any law enforcement agency or fire agency are allowed to do their own dispatching. But when it comes to call taking, that's your responsibility. the city of Vero Beach and the city of Sebastian, and even the sheriff, is allowed to do call-taking responsibilities because you allow that. You choose for that to happen.
Okay.
And you can choose to do something else if you choose to.
Right. Okay.
And that will be, according to the ISL folks, that will be a measured segment of what's now being labeled the 5.33, which is 5 minutes 20 seconds call cycle dispatch arrival of the first unit. They have these different measured steps along the way, but you're right, that is if you lose 20 seconds there, your clock's ticking, and that will go against us.
Just generally speaking, if I may, when it comes to ISO used to be, to answer a previous question, ISO used to be a nonprofit agency that collected data from around the U.S. and would give that information to insurance agencies to help establish premium rates.
Now they're a firehouse construction firm?
Well, it is a for-profit business now. It is a for-profit business now, but their intent is the same, is to provide data sets to insurance companies to create premium rates. Now, what has changed over time is, and I would tell you that it has changed since I was a young guy doing this, and more recently what they're trying to do is, it's nice to say that a location is within 5 miles of a station, but it doesn't measure workload. If you had a very busy station house, you can't make all the calls in a reasonable amount of time. And so the latest effort, and there is no perfect system, but their new system, if I may, Commissioner, is that they're wanting us to have the first arriving fire unit on the scene in 320 seconds or less after dispatch, and the second arriving unit on the scene 560 seconds after dispatch. So it's not just the first unit that's getting in there, it's the second unit that closes the loop. And so
And that would, John, would that get an ISO rating of 1 or 0?
The scale is a good question. The scale is from 1 to 10, and 1 more often is in a very small jurisdiction by geographic size. I don't think in any time in the very near future we're going to see that number here. We have been as high as 6 when we first went to the South County District. We were at a 5 for many, many years. And the last time the study was in, we actually got a 4, but I got to tell you, we barely got the 4.
What's the price break on insurance going from a 4 or 5 to a 6?
4 and 5 on residential is relatively close. When you get above 5, when you start moving into multifamily, commercial, industrial, and larger facilities, it does have an impact on them.
And at what point do you get I don't want to say the law of diminishing returns, but kind of, at what point is it cheaper for a property to pay higher into the emergency services district than an insurance premium?
I don't think that there's going to be a good way to quantify. I don't think that you're going to get to the point where I pay so much into the district that I won't have any insurance at all.
But is it?
I would encourage this board to do whatever you can to maintain the 4.
Okay.
Well, we ran water into Vero Lake Estates because those people had a hard time getting insurance. So water's another component of our utility.
Yeah, there's actually a number, probably 6 layers of factors in this. You have the time, you've got the hydrant service spacing, you've got the response of the second unit, and you've got other grading criteria from the call-taking, dispatching side, training equipment on the truck. It's probably 10 or more.
To the credit of this board, one of the good things that you've done for this community was you provided potable water to many, many people. On the other side of that equation, we often forget that about 40% of our ISO rating is measured with how good is our water system. So that's been a big help.
A good score on that area.
Commissioner O'Brien?
Yeah, and I just, about the economics of a 4 or 5 or 6, I think we ought to just keep in mind, too, if I look at my own personal homeowner's insurance, we have a very high deductible for hurricane to try to keep the premium down. And just a rough number, I think the premium's somewhere around $5,000 for our coverage. Of that 5, like $4,800 is the hurricane premium, and all other hazards are $200. I mean, it's really skewed that the bulk of that premium is hurricane, and fire, earthquake, tornado, everything else is a very, very small part of that. So again, even if that goes up some, it may be a small number. But I understand trying to keep it 4, but the way the premiums are skewed now, that's a small part of the bill, I think.
It's a very good point.
Yeah, right.
And I actually had, and they're still working on trying to quantify it, but I worked with a couple of insurance representatives, and the software that they have for costing insurance doesn't really allow them to go in. I said, run a scenario, $200,000 insured value, run it at a 1, run it at a 10, and run it at the 4 that we currently are. And for them to override and put in a different number versus it grabbing the number that we already have, they're going to corporate to try to figure out how to manipulate that. So we can actually quantify it. Is it $10? Is it $100 when you go from a different grade?
Yeah.
So at some point,
I think it'd be good to get that.
That's very good information to know. That way you'll say, listen, now's the time to build a station because the people with insurance are paying this much anyhow, and we'll save or
you can quantify it.
Yeah.
That's and one thing that we have now with the merged system is, well, actually, let me finish this and I'll go into that. So this is in their presentation to us last year was the introduction of the analysis. And when I use the reference of the audit of FMPA, they're actually going to come back in here, take run sheets from actual fire calls, and they're going to run our times for us. And one of the suggestions going forward is now with the GIS department, now that we know how they're going to evaluate us, we can do some sample evaluations ourselves on real experience and see how do we score before they come here, which is a very soon to be happening event. But the Will and GIS said we can run this model backwards and see how well are we doing according to these new measured goals that they have for us.
A few years ago, ISO would come in approximately every 10 years to do a survey of a community, and it recently changed in 2014 to every 4 years.
I bet you they charge too.
Their money comes from the other end.
The insurance company?
Yes, but
You do pay for it.
Yeah. In that case, it's on the contingency.
Somehow
Tell me about
everybody's paying for it.
nothing's for free, but
Right.
I did receive notice about a week ago that they will be coming in on August 25th, and I would tell you, I don't get too far ahead of on your agenda here, but I tried to delay that until after October of this year because Station 13 will be open in October of this year, I believe.
Yeah.
And what I did get a commitment is they would get our additional information and they would amend their findings. Because I promised to take the gentleman, I said, I'll take you to the station and show you that it's under construction. And I think by the time he gets here, I think that the county administrator will probably have some guidance from this commission about when you intend to staff that station on some budget workshop notes. And I think that I can make a safe argument.
Super.
Right. All right, so that's our initial reference to, and it was a soft introduction last year in 1710. They didn't really get into it in a lot of detail, but it is going to have a lot of effects. But I think what I want to do is try to stay ahead of the curve on where we put stations, when, and how our measurements are going to be different. They also place additional emphasis on firefighter safety, personal protective equipment, and we'll need to look at to make sure. They have a scoring sheet, one page at what kind of points you get for each thing, so we can see where we're doing real good. Like on our water supply, I think we almost have 100% of those points, or 90-ish% of the points on the water supply side. And there's some other areas where we might be able to. We want to give us a little buffer on the 4, so we're not at that tipping point to go to a higher score to get a little bit of a safety factor there in our rating. Communication side, where you talked about that, Commissioner Davis or Chairman Davis, on the call taking side is going to have an effect on how they're going to start looking at us. Water supply, we touched on that. The community risk reduction is also a scoring point as well. Some references to NFPA. Now, this was the building code prior to the one that has just taken place, which has a lot of, from the wind speed requirements and a lot of other factors, I wouldn't be surprised to see some glitch bills to modify some portions of that. Probably won't get into the fire prevention and life safety portion, but there's probably going to be some changes in that in the next legislative session. Relationship, benefits of effective program, and like you had said, Commissioner O'Brien, how do we measure? And as soon as I get that insurance information, I'll forward it on to John so we can know if you spend X and the people save X, you can have, and on the business side, we're using a $1 million commercial facility as the exposure limits to look at the same scenarios for them, so we can really look at these more accurately. So this map is taking, or these illustrations, we're using a 2-mile fire station services area. But in 1710, they're going to be measuring this timeline of events. In some cases, it might be 3 miles. Some places it might be 1.75 miles. As you get into more dense, more turns and curves getting to a particular location of the county. So this is illustration purposes only, but I think you'll be able to follow through the areas. So our station 1 footprint will be smaller, 2 smaller. Going through each of these 3 will be smaller, 4, and you'll see here in a minute as we go through each of the stations that our service area will be altered. When you look at number 8, when you're in Sebastian Highlands, you have one straight road, Barber Street, and then once you turn off of that to meander, especially with an engine, you're not, if you have to turn every couple of blocks, you're getting 15 miles an hour in your travel time. And again, the mapping people can actually put in those speed limits of travel from a practical side and measure some of these events for us. So 9, and also on 9, it's really unfortunate Sebastian didn't cooperate with us, because we now have a station really kind of tucked up into our far corner area where you're only getting half of the radius of the response benefit of that station the way they're going to measure us. But that's how Sebastian wanted to not work with us at that time. Then we go out to 10. Out in Fellsmere, 11 over at the east end of the Wabasso Bridge, 12 on the north side of Gifford, 13 the new station coming along, which is going to provide great relief to a lot of the demands on the system in the South County. And what kind of started all this discussion is, where do we put the replacement for Station 7? Where's the optimum footprint? And if we take the proposed location that we have, the Vero, or the we call the old JC site, we're 2.5 miles from Station 3. But when you see the overlapping where that 2.5 mile arc is, to me that's sort of the non-benefit district. We're overlapping the adjoining service footprint by a considerable amount. In my mind, that's where the free site begins to cost us, because then as you fill in these footprints over time, if you're too close and you're not maximizing your distance separation, we're going to be having to forking out more money to maintain a level of fire service protection than what we need to. But I think we can look through this and use some of the data to help us decide where we should go. Next would be...
With you looking at the distance now, mm-hmm. and ISO going away from the distance.
Right. We had to example it somehow, so until we can have mapping actually run some actual run times, mm-hmm. We had to have some way to kind of illustrate it for today. So we used a standard measurement of the 2 mile just for illustration, and in some stations it will be a larger footprint, and depending on the response area, the footprint would be smaller. How much smaller would it be than 2? I don't know. But when you have good east-west, north-south travel lanes, your footprint potentially could be a larger footprint.
And whenever they're doing, ISO is doing this based on the response time to fire?
Actual fires. Okay. Not fire alarms, not actual fires.
Not EMS calls?
No. And that's a whole separate thing. Right. Glad you brought that up. Going into... Yes, Mr.
Well, just a couple things. If they're doing it towards actual fires, do we actually have enough actual fires to have them actually compute the whole county?
I said we don't have that many, and he said we'll look at what you have had.
Okay, so it's not really fires; it's a couple scattering of fires.
Right.
Okay, and the second thing is, at the end of the day, I mean, you can get a sort of geographical area that's covered by the vehicles going out so far. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is where the calls go to. Mm-hmm. So, and that would give you a totally different look. So, I mean, if you're going by the ISO thing, it seems to... the way
it's one. And we have kind of the opposite end of that spectrum in a slide that shows some of our response levels and calls and what I call hotspot areas.
Yeah, okay.
One thing that 1710 is going to do, if we have a station that has an ALS engine at it, and they see that that's a first response closest unit to something, and that unit is in service for ALS 30% of the time, instead of getting credit for a full engine, we're going to get a fractional credit. They're going to deduct the ALS engine service time against a full credit number. So right now, if we get 1 point for a engine, and that engine's out 20% of its active time or some measurable number, they're going to look at how often is it out. We're not going to get 1 anymore. We're going to get less than 1. And you're going to see where this ties into the EMS demand level side.
Say that one more time?
No, that,
If you have an ALS engine,
Which we do.
say Station 5, ALS engine.
It rolls.
It goes out on EMS calls, let's just say 20% of the time.
Okay.
Instead of us getting credit from the ISO rating as a engine that can respond, they're going to say, well, 20% of the time it can't respond to a fire because it's responding to an ALS engine response. So it's going to cost us, we're providing better service to the community, and it's going to come around on the back end and cost us some deduction in our point system.
yeah, but that's the issue, goes back to my other
Exactly.
comment there. It's what's our end goal?
Right.
To save a few dollars or to save a few lives?
Right. And how to...
Okay, I mean, and that's what I don't want us to lose, going one direction, because I thought our goal was actually, at the end of the day, to save lives.
Well,
And I agree.
Okay, I just wanna-
it's actually I mean, we could save lives by spending a whole bunch more in one. You know, it is try to have that perfect balance. It would be probably.
We're trying to
Well,
have
understanding that we're dealing with us, and we're never going to get perfection. Okay, I just want.
And then Commissioner Zork says, since majority of our calls are medical, we'll get really dinged on that ALS because
will.
Yeah.
you're saying
You'll see
20,
a
it's
prime
probably more like
example
70%.
There's some
on
that,
medical calls,
that you'll see
so-
coming up that really, and again, the mapping guys did a great job of putting this together. So looking at the Station 7 location, I think we can take the 1710 data, or the 1710 criteria, give it to the mapping guys and say, run some scenarios and give us a geographic footprint range of where the best place we should be using the 1710 measurement side, and see how far. The next slide shows, okay, here's our Station 7 response area, and we'll categorize it. The red dot, that means 310 times a year that address goes to, and that's one of the assisted living or the Hospital West walk-in clinic, one of those. The Station 7 comprises 4.3% of the total call volume for the district. So in looking at where that is, when we go to the next one, it says, okay, if you moved it further to the west, this was just sort of let's place it here, not using the 1710 measuring part, because when we prepared this, we didn't have all the criteria of how that would work, but we'll be able to run it now. The further west we go, again, now we have a little bit of a service gap, potential service gap between 3 and a new 7, but once we run the actual GIS model, we can say, if you're a quarter mile to the east, you're better off. But what I'm trying to point out is that our free station on 26th Street may be a free footprint, but it may be the wrong place to be because the long-term cost of being too consolidated with our placement of stations cost us a heap of money down the road.
But again, if this is for 40 years, the whole demographics of the neighborhood is going to change radically over the time period. And I think we're moving towards the type of stuff that you need supercomputer modeling for.
Well, that's what they say some of the capabilities they have.
And is this number? I see where number 7 is, and you're talking about the new station.
The new permanent footprint for 7. Where should it geographically be? I think the 26th Street site is too close, and the overlap service response areas, even though they're going to alter when you actually apply the 1710 guidelines, the overlap and the demand of that built-out area in between is very low. Now, if you had a 1,000-unit assisted living in the overlap, makes sense. But when you have a low-density single family in the overlap area, there's not a lot of call volume in the overlap, which again tends, in my mind, we need to be further west and maybe closer towards the 60 frontage versus, I think we're 2.5 miles south. So this is not a proposed location. This is just an example. If we can actually have them run some more accurate scenarios for us and say, look, here's 3 places that this is how we would score on these 3 particular areas. Then you'd have to see what's for sale there and potentially do an outright purchase, but again, trying to be in the right place versus the free place.
And I respect Commissioner Zorka, but I'm just concerned that it's a very slippery slope here, because if we begin to, we're not building for a Class 1 system. We're never going to be able to afford that. And we are trying to create a system where we're trying to have a good response time. And consolidation of fire and EMS divisions has saved this community a lot of money. If we go back to the system we had before, where fire only does fire, traditional fire, and EMS only does traditional EMS, I'm going to need about 6 more ambulances and about 4 more engines times 3 shifts to do the same workload.
Where was that suggested?
Well, I'm just trying to make the discussion here. We've had a discussion about
right, and
this.
there's some things that John and I probably, we're not on the same page. But we're kind of putting it out there as maybe some additional research, some looking at it, running some scenarios, and going forward, I think because of the growth in certain areas, 3 base stations that can hold more apparatus, and as the area grows, you have the footprint. Now, if Fellsmere itself, the new Corrigan area, goes crazy, that's a new standalone demand area, new station. The Oslo Interchange 95, if that area gets busy, a new station maybe on the West Oslo area. We're trying to take the rules of the game, put on the practical side of the almost 90% of the calls for service are EMS. And you have to balance that of the saving lives part versus how much you're saving on the insurance. And like you said, hit that happy medium in the middle. And how do you hit that?
If that's your concern, to be concerned about the cost of insurance and not service to the community.
Well, it's you have to somehow weigh both of them. I'm more concerned on the EMS side because it's the highest demand of the system.
Yeah.
I understand it's 2/3 of the calls, but Chief, doesn't the ISO standards taking place in population counts?
The new ISO study it does the population.
Well, I think it's
John, your light's not
might be
on.
off.
Yeah, I don't think the people out in the
I'm sorry.
listening world. There you go.
Discussion is a demand for service. You can't just measure how far apart 2 locations are. You have
Right.
to include workload. And Station 3, which is probably one of my 3rd busiest stations in the fleet, they're often out. And so I think along that State Road 60 corridor over the next few years, you're going to see some growth out there. You're going to see multifamily. You're going to see more commercial move in. And I am too concerned about the costs. And I think in a previous proposal, what I suggested to you was we're moving Station 7, the engine and the ambulance, to a modular site near State Road 60 and 95. And if you bless the JC property, we've already spent money to do all the engineering for that facility at this time. But the effort was to save money over time by when that station opens. It would be a 3 base station. We're building for the future. It would open with an engine, which would be new employees, and relocating the ambulance from Station 7 to the JC property and leaving an ALS engine in Station 7's territory in an effort to step into saving the cost. Instead of hiring 17 people at a time, we would hire less, 10.
And response times to actual calls for service are not just the road traveled. We're not just taking into consideration the mileage to one call to another. We're taking into effect the return, many other factors, including returning back to the house, regrouping, re-outfitting, and coming back from another call that might be out of district as well, correct?
More often an engine stays in its zone, an ambulance goes to an emergency to the hospital and back to their zone. The other thing about mileage that we have to be careful of is that the engines in ambulances only travel about 10 miles an hour over the posted speed limit. The roads are designed for a certain safe speed. We allow them to go about 10 miles an hour over that, with the exception of school zones. So going back to your middle school math, if an object's traveling 60 miles an hour, constant speed, it travels 1 mile in 1 minute. And I would tell you that probably most of our units are probably, if you did an average time, they're probably doing 35 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. And so when you're looking at some of these time windows, it has an impact on how many stops, how many turns, and Commissioner Zorka is exactly right. If you go into some of the subdivisions that are posted for 25 miles an hour, even though the unit can do 80 miles an hour easily, you're not going to do 80 in that neighborhood.
Some of them for less than 15 miles an hour, Chief.
Yeah, you're correct.
And again, so each of these stations, if they were plotted out under 1710 would have different footprints because of the driving conditions around that station, density, traffic levels, all that type of stuff. So the question is, do you move forward with this one, which in my mind is crunching the service too close together? Wish the JCs had bought property a little bit further west before they gave it to us. But because in the long term, what I'm trying to do is get something that increases coverage and where we don't have to have another station at 60 and 95 going on is, can you come up with a place where you can cover both places with one station with the appropriate amount of staffing and equipment? Again, that's our and these are EMS responses only, no fire. And if it was fire, it'd probably be a pretty sparsely dotted map. And again, that's the 82nd. Okay, looking at total calls for service, shifting over to the EMS side, which ISO doesn't give two hoots about unless you're using an ALS engine and they're going to deduct points for you. 26,000 calls for service. You can see we do have a community that has peak seasons and low seasons. We're not consistent throughout the year. One of the biggest drivers and the largest demand for service sectors is Sector 38, which is the hospital. Again, here's Sector 38 accounts for 8.4% of the total EMS call volume. The Point West, Sector 66, I believe it is 4%. So those two stations, out of all of them, carry the lion's share of the EMS demand, by looking at the chart. So next, when you look at Sector 38, which is the 37th Street corridor, and it goes a little bit out from that, that also has, so that individual response area, 2,238 calls in the year 2014. However, 74% of the calls are from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So it's a very almost predictable cycle of demand. What happens, and it'll come up on this next slide, I think, that's the geographic footprint in white of the Sector 38. If you have Station 10 taking a patient to Indian River and they get released from their call, then you get a Sector 38 call because they're the closest unit. They get dispatched, which leaves Station 10's footprint for ambulance care, not ALS engine, but ambulance side, exposed. Then you have Station 8 drive from Barber Street to Fellsmere, and on a good day, that's probably an 8 to 10 minute response time.
Do they physically, do they drive to the station and sit?
Well, no, only, this would be...
they might drive to the McDonald's at 512 and 95?
No, actually, the ALS engine is still in the zone.
Right.
They would respond
This
first,
would be from the ambulance
stabilize
side
the
only,
patient,
right.
and the closest available med unit would transport to the hospital.
These guys.
The next one is what I call the more frequent domino effect, and it also deals with the Station 7 area. Station 7 goes to the hospital. They get back-to-back nursing home calls. They're out of their zone for a couple of hours. So what happens? 3 covers 7, 1 covers 3, and sometimes then 4 covers 1, and it's a domino effect. And there are more frequently than we probably like to admit where almost every EMS ambulance is committed and busy, and almost to a point of waiting. We're really kind of at our peak of system delivery on the ambulance side, and a lot of it's compounded by the demand of Sector 38 with that high volume of calls.
And Sector 38 is where again?
The hospital.
Okay.
So if that area... Yes, sir.
It's more all the doctors' offices on that road, not the hospital.
Not the hospital itself, correct. It's everything but
all
the
these
hospital.
patients going to the doctor, and the doctor says,
Right.
based on this test, you need to go to the hospital right now.
Yep.
And they get a 911 call.
Exactly.
And that's why it's all the business hours, because they're...
Right. A lot of at the nursing home or assisted living shift change, a lot of them are 12-hour shifts, so at 7 o'clock when the new shift gets on, they see something doesn't look right. And then the doctor's office demand, that's the second component of that.
And that's all ALS calls, or ALS, BLS?
All ALS. Responded as ALS, maybe transported in a BLS mode, but responded as ALS. One thought would be is how can we cover, if you cover the demand of Sector 38 by either going back to where having a Med 5 there, and that was the designated 38 coverage.
Med 5 was in front of Gifford Middle School?
No, from Winter Beach.
No.
Oh, just Med 5, okay.
Right.
All right.
If that became part of its service footprint, this crisscrossing domino effect would probably be significantly lowered. And I originally had a different concept, and with some meetings with Brian, thinking about it long and hard last night, his proposal probably makes more sense than mine, but I know Jason really liked mine the other day because it was probably going to cost less.
He wears the uniform.
Which I would expect that reaction. What we're trying to do is how do we spend the least amount to provide the best level of care and the best response time and not get crippled by this new crazy 1710 rule that's going to cost us points in a lot of different areas. So that's what I call the domino effect. And I encourage each of you, if you haven't, get on your phone the 50 app, and you will be amazed how often this crisscrossing domino effect of crossing one territory to the other happens. It happens a lot. Even at 5 a.m. in the morning, as it did today, there was a lot of activity early in the morning, as there is a lot of mornings. Next area, in kind of just putting everything on the table and looking at, we actually have a chart that has the entire run demand for the entire county by sector, but not to put you guys to sleep. We're just going to kind of do a 30,000-foot review. This is the North County area where we have Station 9 in the top right-hand corner of the screen, 8 on Barber Street, and 10 in Fellsmere. And you can see with the new rules, or even the old rules, the Vero Lake Estate folks, North County Pool, the 3 schools, there's a service gap that's pretty easy to see.
Well, I would like to point out staff did not recommend that station in Fellsmere.
Oh, I know. I'm just saying that's what we
recommended one by I-95, and the Board of County Commissioners overrode us and put it out in Fellsmere.
Well, then I'd like to point out that most of us weren't here at that time.
You weren't.
Thank you.
You weren't. No. I don't think there's a commission that was here at that time.
And in fact, I think since you moved to the Fellsmere, that's one of the reasons why you're still here, Joe.
Well, it was a close call. I had a question. Did Bob Keating a role and help you with your PowerPoint?
No, this sounds more like Richard work with the president type stuff.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, I would mention that Commissioner Zork has gone beyond his allotted 30 slides.
Yes, I have.
With a number of years.
And there's only a couple
I
more.
think there is a gross flagrant violation here.
The flag.
This area clearly has a service gap, I think, and they're paying the same base rate, and in my mind, they're not receiving the same level of response time for fire or EMS, period. One thought would be is the portable units we have at Station 1, once that rehab is finished, we could look at putting some equipment up at the North County Pool area. It's a temporary facility. We won't have as many crazy things to go through with the state on that footprint of land because permitting through them is difficult, as we all know.
Yeah.
But being a temporary structure, that may, since we're going to have those in our inventory of availability to put somewhere else or use for something else, might be something I think to look at, since the map really tells itself who's not getting the same level of service that other areas of the county are. And if you did put one in the North County Pool area, again, using for illustration, the 2-mile footprint, not
Let me ask you this.
Yes.
Why in the world, with there being 3 residences north of 512 in that general area, why can't we say that we should be able to get to the southern portion of that circle or triangle faster than, because there's no development there to the north, and so for them to say that that's your cover area, and I'm assuming that because that's your cover area, they're assuming that you're going to be busy in that area sometime to the north, to the point that you're going to be taken away from them to the south?
Potentially. They could measure it that way. Probably if we used a 1710 model exercise and said, okay, if you wanted to cover Vero Lake Estates, where's the best place to put it? And go through that same exercise. The North County Pool site, with the activities that go on there, the 3 schools and that close proximity, going out for the additional coverage on 95, which for the next 3 years, hopefully that project will get finished, and the massive amount of equipment we tie up on 95 because of accidents, because of the construction, or contributed to by the construction, ties up a huge amount of our resources out there. So I think if we ran the 1710 travel model to see how much of the footprint, if you were at that area, could you cover so that people got both the insurance benefit and improved life-saving response from the medical side. And hear that sound? That's like crickets.
Is that your time is up?
The time's up.
Actually,
Yes.
you had more.
Thank you, Commissioner
I was
Zork.
able to delete 3 of them.
Penalty period is now in play.
Now, let me see if there's any other talking points. The Orlando station, not Orange County, but City of Orlando, in compliance with 1710, is doing some interesting things. When a station is dispatched, they actually have a clock in between the exit doors of the building that starts running, and a trip monitor, as soon as that bumper exits the building or trips that monitor, it sends in that 1710 required piece of measured data into the software that Orange County has for tracking. And then they have the normal radio reporting times after that. But they're allowing you 80 seconds to get out the door. If you can get out in 60, it gives you 20 seconds more. That's sort of their allocation of time out the door. During the day when you're up and moving around, that's probably pretty easy to achieve. If you're waking up in the middle of the night and having to get all your gear on, that may be a little bit longer. If it's wintertime and you got to warm up for a minute or two before you put it in drive, you've got all these other, kind of crazy factors. That's what they're doing as a initial step of measuring their performance. Again, I think with what the GIS folks have, we have the opportunity to really take what they've shared with us in the 1710 report, which I have and you probably have as well. How do we look at implementing it? But in the overall, the Station 7 placement and the Sector 38 response demand, I think proper location for 7, and how do we provide relief to the rest of the system by having more of a designated response area, maybe from Station 5 to there. The distance is 4 miles, but it's a good 4 miles because it's a short 4 miles driving time because it's all on US 1, as Brian pointed out to me yesterday, so I drove it twice last night and timed it and said, maybe he's right. My initial plan was cover it for the 12-hour peak with a different type of shift arrangement and have a unit just designated at the hospital node area in the middle. That's Sector 38, but Brian's approach probably is going to be better. One last area, I think in the last month we've got, counting on the new employees in the county, we have about 20 new fire medic type hires that we've added to our system. I think we have to look at how do we support and train and nurture and keep these guys on their textbook skills they learned in class, but also their field experience skills, and how do we manage that? I'm going to bring up something at a regular agenda item to look at that in a standalone item. So question would be, do we want to look at the Station 7? Is there potentially a spot that gives us the best bang for the buck on where we could place it, that where we would end up with a single station? Now, 20 years from now, if we have 5 CVSs out there and other things, you have enough demand of other needs for services, you could potentially end up with something on the west side of 95. But if you could cover it from the east side and service that gap, and I could see, and probably not the too far near future, that station could easily, if some of these other assisted living places come online out there, is 2 med units out there. Because if right now they're approaching the 4.5% of the system to demand at some point, but having a place to park that truck and a place for that personnel to sleep at night when we design that station. Oh, and that's the I did have a couple of interesting conversations with what I would call station design planning consultant types, and wasn't able to share a lot with them because the plans that we have are homeland security, privacy, something or other. But in generally describing to them, I think, whether it's for the new Station 7 or something, ways to improve station design, improve the way to comply with the new wind speed and building code maps, because it's to take the wooden roof that's on Station 4 and get that to comply to the new code. We spent when you look at the cost estimate, it's a six-figure number pretty much to get that roofing system to fit on top of that building. And a lot of it is because of the new code with the new wind speed. It's very, very just costly. That there may be some other ways to achieve that. It may be not as aesthetically pleasing. I'm looking for safety for the employees in the building, park the apparatus. If you can make it look nice on the outside without spending a fortune, is my preference. Because
I understand what you're saying with that, but you weren't here whenever they built the one in Roseland. Mm-hmm. And
well, they have one now, so they won't.
Oh yeah, but yeah, I'm just saying that it's the fire stations that
works of art.
I don't think everybody necessarily wants one built next to their house.
Right.
And they certainly want one that looks like a military institution.
Right.
And so to be able to have some aesthetics, it can still be
right.
bunker proof like you're talking about,
right.
but you got to have something that fits into the community. I would say so. Not to go too far down that route.
Right. With that, look at that. It's only 3:00.
And you done?
So the question is, do we want to, from this, work with John's office and the mapping guys to run some scenarios to bring back to us? One, let's take a few audits of some actual things that they're going to be looking at doing to us in the near future. I think that's something to do a couple trial runs, and let's just see how do we score, or not score, but how did our times turn out on some real actual events that they're going to be pulling on us in August.
Do we? I guess really, in looking at this, none of anything here in front of us today, in my opinion, is going to shape anything, because we're already on 13. Is it? Is that the one that's on 4th Street?
Right.
Okay.
The one on 4th Street, 43rd.
I'm going to stop using station numbers because I can't keep those straight. I just know where they are. The one on 4th Street?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then I'm assuming that you're not wanting to slow down moving number 7 right now to get to
Oh, no.
okay.
No. That is full speed ahead as quick as we can get that open.
It doesn't affect that.
Correct.
And then so the question is then where are we in the stages as far as actually building? We're starting the plans with engineering for the actual building for the station at the JC site.
That's correct.
And so what you're wondering then is that whenever they come here in August with the ISO, will that be too late to move the JC site in the event that the numbers come back different?
It probably depends on how much we when they come here, I don't know. I think they're going to probably give us some feel and discussion as they ride around with John and look at and evaluate some things. I think we can, if we don't do anything more on the JC site for a couple of months, that's not going to keep us. It still keeps us within our lease window of the temporary site. I don't think we get jeopardized for that.
Well, the lease site, it shouldn't be affected by this whatsoever, you said.
At all?
No, not the lease site. But what I mean is if we took 3 more months to kind of wait and see how this initial review goes, run some scoring models, and if it shows we would be better off not on the JC but some other spot on the map, we would still be able to...
I don't doubt that there's not going to be a spot that's going to be, I'm going to say, more perfect. Mm-hmm. I don't doubt that a bit. In fact, I think if you went back and actually did the studies, I would say that we could move the existing stations to places that would be more perfect than where they currently sit.
Oh, I agree.
I mean, and never, but and looking at it, even a plant that grows very well is not in that's to the point it's a weed of some kind. That's not the ideal location. Mm-hmm. It's not the ideal conditions. But I think really one thing that I don't know, and I'd like to know whether ISO takes this into account, is do they actually look at what I would say is our comprehensive plan? They probably don't, because they're looking for instant gratification as far as what the numbers are.
Right.
But if you look at our comprehensive plan, clearly State Road 60, there's a whole lot more
to come
on north and south of State Road 60 right now, and that's and as far as developable land, and there's even more than that on the west side of 95, specifically when you go out all the way to State Road 60 to 98th Avenue, I think it is, and go south. I mean, I never knew until this last boom that we even had multifamily zoning out west of 95. And so, I think that as much as it's important for us to look at the ISO numbers and try to keep them in moderation, and I don't have a problem with what you're talking about with a couple months there to do so. But really what this commission ought to be looking at just as strong is going to be where in the comprehensive plan where we have right now future development, where's it going to come from? And with the Corrigan annexation, now we've got, right behind the CVS, we've got the city of Fellsmere.
Right.
So, I just, that whenever you start talking about maybe not doing one west of 95.
Well, not initially, but I could say in the potentially, depending on what they do, could trigger things where you could have something 5 years from now. You could have something there, or earlier if there was a demand that warranted it.
Or you can look at things differently and say that Fellsmere is never going to be able to afford the infrastructure necessary to development, so it's 25 years off. I'm serious. The things are so fluid. I have a hard time once we get out past about 3 or 4 years everything in my mind just degrades. And
the age, Bob.
No,
the age.
Yeah, right.
I was wondering who was going to jump in and take that stuff.
Take the easy ones, Wesley. Well, seriously, with time, the value of something just drops off with each year you go out.
Right.
The
value of the future planning.
Yes.
Yes.
You have a very high discounted value that you're using. So when you're 20 years out, it's about zero.
Right.
So a couple other comments I'd make, though, is it'd be helpful if we were going to have a workshop this developed to have the backup earlier. Because quite frankly, I understood the station slides and the distances and everything, but a lot of the slides with the other graphs and stuff like that, they weren't intuitive to me, and I can't say I took much from them.
Okay.
So I'm sure they would be very helpful if I had a chance to read everything and find the X and Y axis ahead of time, and then I usually do well with them. But to just look at them first time, as I'm trying to figure out what the person's saying, who's explaining them, I don't get nearly as much out of them as I could. So it'd be helpful to have everything ahead of time. And then it would also, for me, of course, what's missing is what?
A spreadsheet.
60 slides and no freaking spreadsheet.
Well, we use spreadsheets to make the graphs.
No.
And they asked that I want those included, and I said, no, let's shorten the pages.
No,
correct?
the Jason type spreadsheet, because,
Right.
we have significant millage rate increases coming along.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this, it seems like, a lot of things that are very nice.
I'd like to change that to your comment there. Significant millage rate increases when we open fire stations.
Well, we just had one in 2013. Okay, if you wanted me to say that, whenever we open a fire station,
there's a
significant...
Because I got a comment the other day that about the significant millage increase, and I said, really it's just in the fire station. And when you open the fire station, people don't want them to get the wrong impression.
Okay, for emergency services, though, there's still, and I don't think people are really thinking about the number of fire stations. When they get the emergency services bill, they're going to go... Not, we've gone from 13 to 14 fire stations. I think they're going to go, the dang millage rate went up 15%.
Right.
And over a 5-year period, it's already going up 40%. So it helps me an awful lot whether I know something's going to be a material change to the millage rate or I'll call it, for me, minor change. So whether it's going to impact it, give it a 1% impact, or the impact of a station, which may be 12%. So that always helps. So Jason needs to do his share on this to really have that 5-year pro forma where you can by line item see what each additional thing means to the budget and millage rate. So, because some things we may decide, at the end of the day, it pays to have what you were saying by the hospital and forego another station for 5 years. But without that type of economic support, it's nearly impossible to say.
And then how would you? And then you have to measure somewhat the non-measurable part of the. I don't know if we could create a model that if we did that scenario by the hospital or something that designated cover that area, the reduction and increase of response times to the other areas because the units were in their home base and not doing back-to-back nursing.
I feel like we're going to make some good strides in that direction by adding to the prototypical station. And if there's one thing I'd like to come out of this today is to make sure that our prototypical station has 2 boxes and one ambulance or one fire truck.
Or the ability to have it.
And if they don't, the building has the capability to do it. And so, that should the one on 13th Street, 4th Street. It's going to be that way. And so where you have a lot of those arrows going back and forth, they're going to.
That's going to help.
It sure is. And then the as we obviously we're going to do something like that with what's going to happen with Station 7. How many boxes? And we're just going to have one of each out there plus the fire truck, just like it is at Station 7 now.
Station 7, we just moved to the modular.
Yeah.
And we're going to take the engine and the ambulance initially there. And as I mentioned earlier, when we build wherever Station 14 is, and we can decide, you can decide and direct staff what you want to do with that. My recommendation to you is going to be a 3-bay station. Now, that doesn't mean you can only put 3 units in there. Those stalls are big enough that you can actually get an engine and an ambulance in one stall. Our goal would be to open this station, this new Station 14, with the engine and the ambulance from Station 7. You're bringing it further to the east, leaving an ALS engine out there, and you can grow into this. But we built these prototypical stations because I believe that EMS the needs are going to continue to grow, and you'll find stations where you have 2 ambulances and an engine.
So, Chief, with this after 14, how many stations will be 3-bay stations?
We have Station 2 is a 3-bay station,
Right.
and Station 11, which is on North Barrier Island, that's a 3-bay station. And then the next station we have Sebastian, Station 8, Central Sebastian, Barber and Tulip, that has 3 bays. And the new station that's going to be along State Road 60 corridor somewhere, that'll definitely be a 3-bay station.
Doesn't Station 2 have 3 bays?
2, yes.
Okay.
I thought I mentioned that, but it's the East End of Barber Bridge 3-bay station.
So it's about 5.
And here's the thought process.
But Mike, let me get a swift question first. My question is, when do we actually go to putting the second ambulance into one of these stations as opposed to build another station?
Yes, I think the service demand in that area is going to require 2 ambulances without building a new station at many of these locations, and you can put 2 ambulances back to back in the stalls at the 2-bay stations. And think about
But the question is, when do you think that's actually going to happen?
I would tell you right.
The plan.
I would tell you right now that if we were not building Station 13 right now at 4th Street and 43rd Avenue, I would be begging for 1 more ambulance, either at Station 1 on Old Dixie in Vero or Station 4. It's the turnaround times. Station 4 off of Oslo Road, they're gone for 45 minutes. Station 7, right, the current Station 7 on 82nd Avenue, they're gone 45 minutes to an hour. Station 10, 45 minutes to an hour is a turnaround time because their destination is the hospital and back. I need another ambulance there.
Okay, so that would it pay now or somewhere in the near future to have either 1 or 2 of the fire stations with the second ambulance before building Station 14?
Yeah. Well, I would say in that statement, no.
Yeah, and the reason why I think not, just thinking out loud here, is when we open 13, which is on 4th Street, then it's probably going to be cheaper to go ahead and do 2 boxes there, but because it's going to take care of some of everybody's situation between.
The prototypical stations were also built to house the additional staff to have 2 ambulances at these locations.
Yeah,
so that's
and
good.
The other thing that we try to anticipate, some stations are 2-bay stations, and it's because what do we think is going to happen in that area over the next 30 years? For example, Station 13, we have 2 factors of Station 13 at 4th Street and 43rd Avenue. 1, we had a very narrow piece of property. 2, I don't think you're ever going to need a ladder truck in that station. You're probably going to have an engine because it's going to be a bedroom community area for the next 30 years. And so I see more ambulances and the same number of engines as you open with, just 1.
In planning looking forward, you have to look at your densities. What your densities in South County is our highest density where we're putting in 13 as far as build out.
Right.
Then you have other trigger points like looking at the comp plan, the South County initiative. If those 2 projects come back online, that's 700 plus units south of Oslo and the 58th.
But that's kind of what Joe was saying. Is basically the comp plan shows you densities, and that's where those initiatives are coming with the underlying land use.
Right.
We're still coming forward with that.
Mr. Chairman, earlier you mentioned that perhaps maybe, in planning, the stations may not have been at the optimum site. The inference would be maybe just by blocks in real estate and not by leaps and bounds, right?
No, absolutely. I think we're close. I mean, you can tell that by the looks, yeah.
I don't want anybody to think that, we miscalculated on projections, on population and response, and I want them to have faith in the standards in which have been applied historically to ensure that people have the best in service. So I just want to point that out.
For example, the mooring station, it should be somewhere in the island, probably with a bridge over, in the middle of the Indian River Lagoon. That way you don't have so much dead space on the far east side of it where there's no residential development.
But we
That's
probably
a classic example of it being where it is by default, but it's not an ideal location.
And it serves that community. It has my least number of calls for service, but most of the calls that happen from that station are very serious calls.
Yeah. It needs to be there. But y'all see what I'm saying about the ideal location?
But I just wanted to point out, I believe that the intention was probably just by a few blocks here and there, not
Probably with the exception of the Roseland station. If that was a mile further south or a mile and a half further south, we probably would have a better. But it's there and
closer to the airport. You're saying,
or closer towards where the old station was, something north of that would have been probably better. But it is where it is, and we just have to. We're not going to move it. It costs too much.
The cheapest piece of property we found when we were trying to build Station 9 was $3.5 million for slightly over an acre in that area. And it was just, we bought something that was much better in price and it still services the area. And
then now on the flip side, when you look at the 20-year cost, in some cases, paying $1 million or $2 million for a piece of property because your 20-year cost is $50 million, putting it in the right spot outweighs free versus paying. In my mind, when you look at McDonald's and you look at Wells Fargo Bank or you look at the chain operations, they know how far apart they should be from each other to maximize customer service and all the other things in Publix's model of where they put things. And we're just trying to apply using our rules that we operate under to put things in its optimum spot from ISO as part, the reality of the EMS driver side, which is creeping up to that almost 90%, 87% number, and would have been nice. And actually, the insurance guys have been working on this for about 2 weeks and almost a month, trying to get somebody to write a software code where they can actually run those scenarios for us. And I really appreciate their effort of them doing that. And I think they'll eventually get it so we can really look at the number, like to see, is it $5 or is it $500? And you can say, we did this, but you're going to save this on your premium side. Or you can at least weigh it and quantify. And then the business side, I think, will be very interesting to see what happens with that.
Whenever the ISO comes in August, how long will it be before they get our numbers back to us?
I think you're probably looking at the spring of 15 at the earliest. Spring of 16, excuse me, of the earliest.
Okay.
Commissioner Zork, I appreciate the time spent into this, and there's been a lot of work involved with it, staff time. I'm getting a little bit of a flavor, hint, aroma of consolidation concern.
Not consolidation concern. I think probably in consolidation at the 5-year mark, there's probably things that happen, and in our community we're high medical demand side. Not every consolidated service district is like that.
Right, but
and now we hire a firefighter, the fire paramedic now, all our new employees. So that's another good thing.
For almost the last 10 years we've done that, for the better part of 10 years.
Right. Most jurisdictions have gone in that direction. But my point is that, with looking at a dedicated box at the hospital.
Well, and I'm saying I went back to Brian's recommendation of one based out of Station 5 there, and it's designated, one of its service areas would be 38. And that's a low-volume station currently, so if it covered 38 from there, and it has a very low response currently because it doesn't cover 38.
And the concern about the skewed numbers, I could agree that, they're counting response to fires.
Only actual fires, not alarms,
right.
Which is, I think...
Right, so I said fire is where there's, it's an actual fire.
Right.
But by the same token, the vehicles are tied up.
Right.
So I think that using the general practice in which we've gone this far is probably in the best light for service to the community. Economics or no economics. And again, I agree with Commissioner Solari that we're here for public safety. There is a line in which we have to draw and make a decision, the best possible decision at the allowable budget, but we can always find the dollars to make it the optimum service. And I think you've done that.
And I think with anything, if you look back and you started with a blank slate and you knew what was going to be built where and when, would we be in different places? Probably, and maybe a different order? Probably. But
If we went by the population maps of when it was in 2004 and 5, we would be way off. But most of those subdivisions did not come to fruition.
right.
So, and again, that supports what Commissioner Solari is saying about projections. If we projected into that and started with a 5-year plan for a firehouse, and especially towards the South County where some of those subdivisions did not come to fruition, or in Mid-County, we would need 3 or 4 more fire stations that would probably be empty buildings at this point.
In 2004,
Unmanned.
2004 the county administrator and I were having discussions about building Station 13. And the economy went sour. Well, we had the hurricanes. We had to rebuild many of the service locations. Then the economy went sour. And so I think Commissioner Solari is right on point. You can only go so far out ahead because you can't project.
Had it not been for the
I don't mean to get between the two of you.
That's all right. We're not going to let him speak anymore.
But there comes a point of diminishing where you just think.
Let him end it on a high note?
Well, so, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Given it's a workshop, we're not supposed to vote on anything.
Right.
I'm just, the sense of what I'm sort of gathering here is whether or not we should be looking at the delay of the station on 26th Street. And so, I mean, if that's sort of a sense of thing, then...
At least run some additional data to see what it supports.
Well, I think then what I would think is the next step is just to ask John for him to put it on an agenda sometime in the near future with the actual staff recommendation and whatever backup material is appropriate at that time.
Okay.
That sound? I don't want to, I mean, I'm
Right,
sure
no.
your workshop, that just is sort of where I am from what I've understood,
Right.
which I'm not saying I understood 100%. So.
Oh, and one other explanation on getting the material out. In working with the ISO folks, our original contact, Brad Bain, was promoted to a more of a national position. His replacement, and working with them and trying to decide, did we want to use a 2-mile illustration or 2 1/4 mile or 1 3/4 mile, was hashed out on and off over the last couple of weeks. And then yesterday, meeting with John, and the last conversation I had with Brad's replacement was, okay, we have to have something. Let's stay with the 2, and that was probably 2 o'clock yesterday. But part of it was working with the new staff at ISO and who we have access to, and he was in Atlanta, not in his Port St. Lucie kind of designated footprint area, doing a project up there for them. So that in part is why we didn't have more information out. We waited longer to try to have it more accurate, but that then caused not having it out to you guys sooner.
Any other questions or comments, Commissioners?
Question on the potential solutions of the Sector 38 concept of what benefit would that bring, is maybe bringing that back as an item to look at if we did something like that. One, what are the costs? Secondly, what are the measured benefits that we can measure? If we do this, then what can we somewhat expect?
And you're talking about doing the ambulance at 5?
Right.
To help take care of some of the...
That demand.
Well, I think what he said is, I think what Brian was saying, 5's got a low volume, so they could take that in and run it better just because it's a low-volume station.
Using the existing ambulance at 5,
Yeah.
expanding it.
We don't have an ambulance at 5 right now.
We don't have
Okay.
one.
No. Okay.
We had an
I
ambulance
didn't know
at
that.
5.
I'm sorry.
We had an ambulance at 5 and it was there for some time, but in an effort to try to resolve some of the issues we were dealing with, the hospital area and the surrounding area, we moved the ambulance from Station 5 to Station 12 on 49th Street as an interim measure.
I remember that whenever we got it open. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and in fact, that kind of moved the one where they had it in front of Gifford Middle School, that little same station.
In the trail.
That one at the front of the Gifford Middle Station actually moved to Station 3 on 43rd Avenue
Okay,
at the end of the airport.
right. Wow.
Yeah,
I remember
time
all those
flies.
things.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Almost forgot about them. All right.
So, we don't actually vote on anything here, so I think they kind of get the feel of what we're...
Yeah, we want to look at covering Sector 38 and then look at make a little bit of determination with some kind of backup about where future station
Stay
And then I
60
think we
quarter
can
west.
take, now knowing how they're going to come in and score us, is take some actual fire events and run those backwards and just, for your, to say, this is how we did, good, bad, or otherwise, this is how they're going to see us. Let's take a sneak peek of it ahead of time and just see how we're doing.
Maybe, John, how hard would it be to go back and tell us the fires over the past year that we've had?
We can do it. It'll take a little time, but we can do that.
Okay. And then that way we can kind of look at it as a commission and say, okay, let's take some of the hard ones, some of the easy ones, and figure that everything else is going to fall in between.
And heck, maybe if you took one from the south, one from the west, one from the north, one from the middle, because you don't want to take them all from the same station because you might have a similar outcome, is take one from each region and say run 10 or 12.
I don't know how scientific that would be because it could depend on how busy everybody else is and that kind of stuff, but you got to start somewhere.
And that's how they're going to look at it, how you cover it during normal operations. So that's sort of how we look at it. If we're busy on one thing and another station is the responding one, they're going to pick up on that same.
And they don't take into account car accidents. We have a lot of car accidents we go to.
Yeah.
And brush fires, they don't count those.
Train
either.
delays.
That's probably
That's what I was gonna ask.
That's
They
probably a
count
good
brush
thing.
fires or not.
Yeah, that's probably a good thing when you're doing ISO though. I mean, if they took all that into account, we'd never make up to a 6.
Right.
Be interesting to go to an ISO meeting and see how they are coming up with these. Kind of going to FMPA meeting, you kind of get what's really going on when you're in the room, of what their objective is, and it may not. Theirs is to reduce exposure to them or raise premiums to maximize return of premium dollars. Ours is how do we provide the best. I want the Cadillac plan for our residents. I want quick response times. I want well-trained staff. I want them placed in the proper place, but we have to do that with what we can afford to pay for at the same time.
What the community measures against us is how long does it take for the first unit to arrive on the scene. They want to know that when they make a phone call that in just a few minutes, somebody's going to arrive and take care of their emergency.
Oh, and also on the 911 call transfer, I don't know if they keep track of when Vero answers the phone. I've been told they get a fair amount of extensive information, dispatch, the law enforcement side, put the call on hold, and transfer. I have no conversation with Sebastian, so I don't know how they do it. I don't think it's an immediate pass-through from the city. They don't go, if they say fire, they don't just put them on hold and transfer them. They gathered information, and now our clock is ticking as they're doing that. Then we lose time in the transfer. Then we've got to pick up and do the same step all over again. And potentially reversing that could help us in our time clock that's going to be ticking.
And we have some of that information already. We do monthly stats on how many primary calls they get at the PSAPs, how many admin calls they get at the PSAPs, transfer times, time to the first pickup, how many rings how much time it took.
Good. That's
and we also have transfer data. When a call comes into one agency, it's transferred to another agency.
Super. So we'll be able to.
Commissioner Solari.
And Peter had a good point also on insurance. That big insurance bill, the portion of this, if we can get some idea of what the fire portion of the insurance actually was and what the difference between, say, a 4 and a 6 was or something.
Right. That's what I really find intriguing.
That really helps give us a ballpark within which we're working.
It may almost make it to where we throw all this out and start focusing back on response times for emergency services for medics.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why it's important. And if that dollar amount is, I'm taking it that the people in the response time, do they get a 4 or discounted insurance?
The district.
So the whole county then?
Well, there's mostly yes to your answer. You still have to be within 1,000 feet of a hydrant. You still have to be within so many road miles of a station. But
so I'll just ask then if it's possible to get a little layman's background on that so we can have a better understanding, then that would also be helpful for me. Because in some ways, if you can look at something and the cost is $200,000, but if you look at it in a different way, it may be $50,000. So I'd like to be able to at least get enough background so I have some understanding of what they're talking about.
I think it's a very valid question, and we all know that if you lived at Blue Cypress Lake, you wouldn't get the same rating as if you lived east of 95.
And if that's the case, then that's
still
the type of thing we know. So because if it's $2 per house, do we multiply that to get the total cost to the county by 60,000 houses, or by 1,000 houses, which is in a different area? That's what we need to get at.
And then I'll forward to you the insurance, these little projects these insurance representatives are working on as soon as they can figure out how to manually insert a different level into their equation. As soon as those come back, I'll give this to you. And those,
I appreciate
those
that.
I think will be very interesting to see. We may be surprised, good or bad, what that swing is, but they have no way of. The experienced agents been writing insurance here for 20 years. I'd love to know that. I have no clue.
Again, August 25th is my next contact with ISO, and I'll try to have more information before then. But that'd be the first opportunity I have one day with an agent to really have a long conversation on some of these questions.
All right, super. I noticed that we have some people in the back. Are y'all with the charter school? And you're doing this because you just were very interested in ISO, and we appreciate that, and we hope this has been more exciting than watching ice melt for you. And certainly do appreciate it. If y'all have any questions, though, whenever it's over, Tim will answer.
I will try. It has been a good learning experience.
It has. It's
met
been
some great people around the state.
Yeah. Is there anybody from the public that wishes to speak or address any issues at all? Commissioners, any further questions or comments? Seeing no further business to be transacted at this time, I now declare this meeting adjourned.